Steve, do you mind if I pull like a real Irish card and open with a poem?
My friend, the Irish poet, what could be more perfect for this moment? Please enlighten us.
Okay, so, I mean, with that set up, it sounds like I've written the poem. I wish I could take credit for it, although it's actually like a Nobel Prize winning poet laureate from Northern Ireland. So if anyone from back home listened to this, they'll be like, that absolute pirate, get him! And the crazy thing is, the first time I actually read it was, this is the irony, and you know, there's a lot in here about the hero's journey, I suppose. The first time I actually read it was on an advert in the New York City subway in Manhattan. They did this.
That's just too perfect.
Yeah, what did they call it? I think they had this like series called Poetry in Motion, right? And it was a series of little poems that they put on the subways and stuff. But it's called Scaffolding. And the reason why I kind of think it's relevant for today is, do you remember back, I think it was the very first episode we did, we were talking about the impact that COVID had on the depressed brain, and you were talking about inflammation, and you kind of referred to the inflammatory response as like all this scaffolding that gets put up. Am I loosely right here?
Yeah.
You know, you talked about that going up, and it was like in a time of an emergency, and then after the emergency was over, the scaffolding came down. And I kind of was thinking like, it makes sense once I read the poem, but you know, the last 2 years, we've all kind of had this emergency apparatus thrown up during the pandemic. And in some ways, like, it's kind of allowed us to explore new things, try new things. Of course, there's been a lot of things that have broken down here as well. But I kind of just feel like, you know, 2 years into it and hopefully slowly creeping our way towards the end, whenever that does eventually come. I think that now we have a really interesting opportunity to kind of like take a peek behind the scaffolding, see what's going on, see what's working, maybe keep doing the things that are working and leave behind the things that aren't.
Well put.
Yeah. Here we go. This is the poem. Hopefully it'll make sense, but I need to put on like my best poet readings voice here, you know, like I feel like I'm doing my country proud. So it goes like this. Masons, when they start upon a building, are careful to test out the scaffolding. Make sure that planks won't slip at busy points. Secure all ladders. Tighten bolted joints. And yet all this comes down when the job's done, showing off the walls of sure and solid stone. So, if, my dear, there seems to be old bridges breaking between you and me, never fear, we may let the scaffolds fall, confident that we have built our wall. Now, obviously in this context, famous Seamus, as we refer to him over here, he's not referring to like a wall that divides people or anything that a certain former president was suggesting. He's referring to a wall as like something positive, like a foundation that relationships are built on, or a foundation that positive things are placed on top of. And, you know, I just kind of had the sense like, you know, we obviously have been talking about this episode in the series for a while, and I just have this sense that as we start to move through this next season, and like I said, strip back some of the emergency measures that we've been operating with during the pandemic, whether it's things like lockdowns or extreme social distancing, or maybe some of the unhealthy coping mechanisms that we all have kind of put up to get us through the pandemic. I think there's going to be a real sense of surprise and a real sense of delight for a lot of people when they actually pull the scaffolding down and realize, hey, there's some really interesting practices here that I've actually built and learned during the pandemic that are going to serve me through the rest of my life. I think there's also going to be the situation where, you know, the pandemic's over and you're like, oh my goodness, I'm still in pandemic mode in this unhealthy area of my life. And that's where the opportunity to kind of move forward, I think, will come from. But you live this, like you're on the front line, you're a mental health professional, you've walked your way through the first official global pandemic and hopefully the last of your career. But how have you seen the mental health landscape change?
Yeah, such a great question. Well, something we've already touched on a little bit is the fact that the pandemic has really, in many respects, just accelerated some trends that we could already see. So one of the biggest trends is the fact that the societal burden of mental illness has been growing for a couple of decades. And during the pandemic, rates of depression, rates of anxiety, rates of substance use disorders, rates of eating disorders, rates of insomnia, all of these have skyrocketed. So the pre-existing trends where we already we're facing an epidemic of mental illness, that it's been like pouring gasoline on a fire. Now, in tandem with that, there's been a growing awareness that people are waking up to the fact that the way we've been living, the isolated, sedentary, fast food laden, screen addicted, sleep deprived, frenzied pace of 21st century life, it's just not working for us. And there's one of the most hopeful things that I've been seeing with my students, with my friends, with people that I talk with in the community, is that people are really increasingly recognizing that we need to do better, that we need to prioritize a foundation of healthy living and psychologically sane habits and practices. People across the board, I'm seeing so much greater awareness and openness and willingness to acknowledge mental health struggles, for people to, I think, to feel less stigma about the fact that they're struggling, to feel less embarrassment or shame or guilt about the struggles that they're having, to be open to seeking treatment. We've seen a huge surge, and I'm sure this comes as a surprise to exactly no one, but we've seen a huge surge of people seeking psychotherapy for the first time, people seeing other mental health professionals like psychiatrists for the first time. And part of this, of course, has been made possible through the much, much wider adoption of novel forms of treatment, like, first and foremost, teletherapy. So seeing a mental health specialist through video conference. And
every time you say teletherapy, I know it's an official term, but I don't know, it's just too close to telepathy for me. And I always have a very, very different image in my head.
All right, fine. Video conference therapy, it will hereinafter be designated.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, man, though, because I just feel like for the first time in my life, even language around mental health has really permeated the culture. Like whether it's corporate workplaces that are now putting on workshops around like mental health and well-being as part of their kind of corporate well-being strategy. And you're like, whoa, like this was not here 10 years ago. Maybe in like really advanced, super cool places, but like, you know, in the run of the mill, let's say accounting practice, it just didn't really happen. And even in the culture, like friends and family, like the conversations we're having, it used to be if I was having a conversation with older members of my family, let's just name drop Granny here, you would have to do a lot of kind of work and laying foundations to set context. And now she's like popping back and like engaging with like pretty in-depth discussions on mental health and well-being. And you're like, go ahead, Granny. Like you have leveled up in this area and I absolutely love it.
You know, one of the things I think that I see with many of my peers, so I'm an old guy, and my daughter is almost 25, and my friends have kids that are teenagers and school-age kids. They've seen that the rate of mental illness, the rate of mental health struggle in young people has in particular just gone through the roof. And that gets people's attention. I think when you see young people hurting, when you see young people suicidal, when you see young people attempting suicide, it's so poignant and it's so heartbreaking. And I feel like, at least for many people that are more middle-aged or older, the thing that's gotten their attention more than anything else is that their kids or their grandkids or, you know, their nieces and nephews are struggling in ways that they never imagined. So, and I think it is, just as a clinical researcher, I just want to put it out there, the toll of increased mental illness has fallen particularly hard on our young people. So that's where we see the biggest increases.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited to do an episode like today, because I mean, there's a lot going on, but I mean, we have some really, really powerful and some really interesting and quite a lot of, let's call them bullet points at this stage to share, but there are things that have really drastically changed my life, and a lot of them I was first exposed through you and your work, but I'll sure we get into that in a little bit. To start, let's do the intro. Let's say hello. Let's say welcome to Mental Health, the podcast where we discuss the latest tools, the cutting edge research, and some of the ancient practices that you can put in place to take back control of your emotional well-being. My name's Hugh. I'm a podcaster and a writer from Northern Ireland. And my journey is, in short, I've been on a journey towards healing from addiction and depression over the last 15 years.
And my name is Steve, and I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm a researcher. I'm a professor. I'm a writer. Mostly, I'm a fellow traveler with each one of you. And you know, Hugh and I believe that mental health is the single most important foundation for living your best possible life. So it's our mission every single episode to help you feel more empowered with knowledge, more encouraged on your own journey. So listen, this is our fourth and final episode in a series on the pandemic and its implications for mental health, how to get through the pandemic with increased mental health. So this is our first ever pilot series, and today is pretty much bringing everything together, setting up a ton of stuff for the future.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, we're going to cover a lot of ground, and our intention is not to overwhelm you. Our intention is just to provide you with a jumping off point for... We haven't really figured out any cool, as Steve would say, pithy ways to kind of like package these, I don't know, fundamental tools, things that we think everyone should have in their mental health toolkit. By no means is it an exhaustive list, but we really want to put some of these things on your radar. We also have every intention of doing a deep dive on each of these topics going forward further along our own podcast journey. But before we jump into the nitty gritty kind of practices and examples, Steve, I would love to circle back a little bit to, I guess, what really surprised me about your book, The Depression Cure, when I read it, is that not once did it mention medication and not once did it mention pills. And that was very, very surprising for me because I was really guilty, I guess, up until that point, like growing up through my teenage years and early 20s and being in the Irish context of like falling into two extreme camps when it came to mental health. It was like, it's either emotional, spiritual, woo-woo, esoteric, like really in-depth stuff, or it's like just throw some pills at it and kind of hope for the best. You take a very, very different approach to it. You're big into things like lifestyle. I know that you dedicated a huge part of your own career to building something called the Therapeutic Lifestyle change, which, you know, has helped so many people all around the world. So I just want to hear your take and your riff on lifestyle versus pills, I guess. Well,
just a minute ago, you used this really evocative phrase of just throwing medication at it, which I love because I think that it just kind of, in a single phrase, encapsulates a lot of the worst of traditional medicine. And I got to be really careful when I critique traditional medicine because, you know, full disclosure, I'm in the medically adjacent community. My wife is a nurse practitioner. So, you know, many of my best friends are doctors, and I'm a big fan of medicine. But at its worst, traditional medicine is a field where people treat their bodies more or less like an amusement park. Like they can just basically do whatever the hell they want with their diet, with their movement, with their sleep, with their substance use or abuse. And if their body breaks down, they can go to the doctor and say, okay, doc, fix me. Throw some pills my way, do a procedure, let's have a surgery, let's get this back under control, patch me up so I can get back on the road. And far too often, traditional medicine has been willing to oblige. So that's where we get the just throw pills at it model. And increasingly, the wiser, more enlightened physicians and medical providers have posed an enormously helpful corrective. And they've said, look, let's approach medicine from the realm of lifestyle. And so, you know, we call this lifestyle medicine. And it's taking off. It's, I think, profoundly influential. And the basic idea is, look, healthy lifestyle, our habits, our daily habits of diet and sleep and exercise and substance use and stress management, all of those things provide the critical foundation for our physical health or for setting us up for illness. We're not going to just treat our bodies with reckless abandon and then rely on a pill or a surgery to save us when our health breaks down. Okay, enter lifestyle psychiatry. a branch of lifestyle medicine. Exactly the same principles apply to our mental health. The way we live profoundly affects the way our brains function, the way our minds function, our mental health, even our so-called, and I wish you could see me because I've got the scare quotes going, our brain chemistry, quote unquote. It reflects our collective habits of living to a surprising degree. The way we live profoundly affects the way our brains work, including our so-called brain chemistry. So during the pandemic, many of us have picked up some really unhealthy habits of living. But like you said, for some people, it's gone the other way, which is incredible. Many people have been consciously, proactively working to put in place some protective habits and practices. So I was thinking at this juncture, maybe it would be helpful for each of us, for you, for me, for every one of you listening, to take a mental inventory. Take a mental inventory of our own foundation of lifestyle habits.
And I think what I really want to say is to kind of give us all a bit of grace as well, is that today's not about achieving like some sort of perfection, or it's not about like creating this perfect bulletproof set of practices or schedules or whatever that will lead you to this utopian place of perfection. We're all way too human for that. But my hope for today is that it will just encourage us to kind of move the needle a little bit towards the positive direction. And all of these things we can maybe improve slightly upon. It's not that we're going to change them overnight, and it's something that can go slowly. These are things to basically create the environment that is most conducive to help you thrive. So these are our 10 practices, our 10 rules, or 10 commandments. I don't know. There are a lot of things we can do. And I actually think, Steve, this will be something that we will probably build out and refine over time. Like I can see us down the line, like putting a lot of work into these and getting them real pithy. But this is the rough draft. This is the first edition. You've heard it here first. And number 1 is slay the screen time dragon.
Okay, first true confession. I love screen time. I love my iPad. I love my iPhone. But here's the thing. Screen time crowds out so much of what's good in life. So, to go back to first principles, we were never designed for a life in which we're just having our face buried in a screen. Our brains, our bodies, our minds are designed to be interacting with other people and pursuing really meaningful tasks that give us a sense that we're making progress towards something with purpose. And, a little bit of screen time, absolutely fine. The problem is that most of us spend way too much time.
Yeah, and this is why I really wanted to start with the screen time, because I don't think we need to reference like any of the studies that are like the average American spends over 4 hours a day on their screens outside of their work, because we see it and we know it in our own lives. Like you kind of read the study and you're like, okay, cool. Or you get your screen time report at the end of the week and you're like, yeah, that's about right. Like, you're even past the point of shame on it. You're just like, yeah, this is just the world that we live in. But we could speak so much about this. I have just like too much to say on the subject, but for the sake of today, I think just a really widely shared principle that is so basic and so powerful is aiming for no screens the first hour and the last hour of the day. And, slaying this
for our American audience, Hugh was saying hour. the first hour.
They're like, the first hour. Is he spelling something? Okay, what comes after R? What letter?
Yeah, what comes after? Or maybe he's doing a pirate impression. R.
The first oar of the day, rowing your boat. There's lots of ways
there you go.
Take it.
Yeah.
But the reason I want to do screen time first is because a lot of the excuses that we have to a lot of the other things we're going to talk about today is I don't have enough time. I don't have the capacity. My life's too busy. And Seth Godin's got this great thing where, people ask him, how were you able to achieve so much? And I think he said something just like, I just made the decision to never watch TV and not have social media. And I think he worked it out. It's something stupid like, is it 100 hours a week or something bananas like that? No, it's not. It's 100 hours a month. But, give yourself a gift after listening to this today and give yourself the gift of the first hour and the last hour of the day. It gives you that amazing downtime, gives you that amazing space, creates a buffer in your crazy, crazy life just for yourself to reflect, to be calm, to give your brain a chance to power up and power down, which is really important. But also, if you do this simple first step, you now have 2 extra hours a day to implement some of the other things we're going to talk about today.
Brilliant.
So the second kind of practice we want to talk about today is get moving, and this idea that movement is medicine.
Yeah. Now, if you've listened to the first 3 episodes, you probably noticed that this is something we keep returning to. Why? Because it's so critically important. And Hugh just said movement is medicine. It sounds kind of ridiculous in a way, sounds like hyperbole, but it's literally true. I mean, if we look at the neurological effects, the brain chemistry effects of getting our bodies moving versus being sedentary, the effects are profound. So think about this. What other medical intervention could you give someone? Is there a pill that you could give someone that would help their depression, that would help their anxiety, that would help their mental clarity, that would help their attention, their focus, their sleep? It's absolutely mind-boggling how beneficial exercise can be. And now I know that for a lot of people, exercise is a 4-letter word. It conjures up all kinds of horrible images of staring at some piece of equipment in a gym, some treadmill, some elliptical trainer, some exercise bike. And we're going to have a lot more to say about this down the road. But for now, let me just say this. 30 minutes of brisk activity, brisk walking, anything sort of at that aerobic level where your heart's really pumping, where you're working up a bit of a sweat, where you're breathing kind of hard and it's hard to maybe carry on an easy conversation. 30 minutes, 3 times a week has been shown to be every bit as effective for the average depressed individual as medication.
Crazy.
It's crazy. And, for the most part, other than a little bit of soreness maybe at the beginning, no side effects. In fact, all the side effects generally are beneficial. And here's the thing. Anything is better than nothing. Any movement is better than nothing. So we find for people that have been really sedentary, maybe they've been ill, they've been injured, maybe they've had COVID, and we don't want them to go out and do 30 minutes of aerobic activity. We want them to start low and slow and build up. Maybe, they could start with a couple of walks, 15 minutes a day. And maybe, the walks are just sort of medium paced at first. And then they build up to really brisk, like they're running late for the bus or the plane. and then, maybe they build it up to 30 minutes of really brisk walking. Now, it takes about 10 minutes to that to get up in the aerobic range. So your target probably for maximum benefit would be about 40 minutes, 30 minutes of which will be really aerobic. And we know that more is, I'm going to lay down a little principle. And again, we're going to have a lot more to say about this later. More activity is better until it's not. There is such a thing as overtraining. And we know if we've been going too hard because we feel worse at the end of our workout than we did when we started. That's a really good little rule of thumb, or if I can use my fancy professorial word, a good heuristic.
Oh yeah, come on.
So if you feel really bad after a workout, if you feel once you've been starting to work out like you're just kind of tired and have malaise, you're overtraining. The general heuristic is more is better up to about 300 minutes of challenging activity or effort per week. 300 minutes. So you do the math on that. You're talking about maybe 50 minutes a day, 6 days a week, something like that. Enormously beneficial.
I guess there's so much more we could go, but for the sake of time, we are trying to really push through here. Third one is to eat like your great granny did. So I'll jump in with this just to start off. The importance of whole foods has just been impressed upon me so much this year through some of the stuff that I've been reading on the gut bacteria, which I know is a little bit of a passion of yours, Steve. And I look forward to kind of picking your brain all on that someday. But just the importance of whole foods. And what we mean by that is foods that just basically have one ingredient, and that's a good rule of thumb. If it has more than one ingredient, you should probably question, is this something that I should be putting into my body? That's if you're being very, very strict, but it's a healthy, easy kind of way to think about it.
Yeah, can I give an American version of that? We're gonna make it even a little bit more generous for folks. If you look at the ingredients list and there are lots of chemicals in it that you can't pronounce, probably a good idea to stay away from it because it's not a whole food.
Yeah, if you wanted to be if you wanted to be hardcore, you're like, if it has packaging, that's next level, and then that comes into the environmental side to it as well. But
yeah,
pick your point on the spectrum, and at least explore it. What I have noticed is, and I read an amazing book by a guy called Stephen Gundry. Everyone who's really incredible in the kind of research space is called Stephen, apparently. That's just the way it is.
It's a requirement. I don't make the rules.
And I think his book was called The Energy Paradox, but he did a huge deep dive into your gut bacteria, and it's way too much for today. But I was really surprised that what he kind of showed was that whatever you feed grows, and whatever you starve shrinks. And it's this idea that like there's bacteria inside your gut that when you feed it good food, they multiply and they get stronger, and they like just are feeling really happy and make you feel better. But if you feed kind of your stomach also bad stuff, then it multiplies some of the unhealthy bacteria that can make you feel really sluggish, can leave you open to getting sick easier, can leave you vulnerable for mental health problems as well. And I like this as well because it kind of feeds into a bit of an esoteric thing I've been building my life upon since I was a kid. I remember one time someone told me the story of like two wolves. I think it might come from Native American tradition where, they believe there was this idea where inside each person there's like a good wolf and a bad wolf. And if you feed the good wolf, then it gets bigger. But if you feed the bad wolf, it gets bigger. And, it was kind of more around like character, where it was like, the more you express anger in your life, the more angry you'll become. The more patient you are, the more you'll increase your capacity to patience. But I've just found, and this guy's book like really showed that whenever you start feeding your body good food, it will start to crave good food, and it will start to stop the cravings for unhealthy food. So for me, like McDonald's is a classic example. You'll be shocked to hear that McDonald's is a staple of the teenage Irish diet. And, once I kind of made this shift with my nutrition, I legitimately just do not have the appetite for things that I used to be absolutely salivating for. And on the other hand, I find myself like, and this sounds so lame and so stupid, I find myself like so hungry for like a salad or so hungry for broccoli. And I know that sounds like I'm from some sort of like outer planet, but it's the truth. And it's been a slow shift, but the further you walk down the path, the easier it becomes. And you mentioned in episode 1 and in episode 2 the importance of omega-3. We talked about how that plays such a big impact on the inflammatory response, how there's been these amazing studies that have proven that it's a really effective protective strategy and habit to have in your life to keep you safe from depression and also help you come out of it as well. You recommend supplementing, which I think is totally a good idea whenever it comes to omega-3, because it could be hard enough to get some wild Alaskan organic fully certified salmon into your diet like 2 or 3 times a week. And I've been supplementing omega-3 for a few years, and it's made a big difference for me, and it's a relatively easy thing to do as well. So we want to put that on your radar as well. We definitely will be doing a huge deep dive on that. I know Steve is probably bursting at the seats here, trying to hold back.
I'm gonna
go give us. What do you have? One thing to say?
Dude, you know me. Never just one thing, but I'll make it quick. Supplements, as a general rule, are designed for short-term use, for, kind of break glass in case of emergency. Supplemental omega-3 fish oil is a godsend for people that are struggling with depression, that are struggling with anxiety, that are struggling with inattention or other kinds of inflammatory conditions. But ideally, this is my thought I want to leave you with. Ideally, in the long run, it's healthier for us if we can make a shift to natural food sources of omega-3. So cold water fish, the cheapest way to do this probably for most people is going to be if you can cultivate a taste for little tiny fish that come in a can or jar like sardines or mackerel. We'll talk all about this in a future episode.
Yeah, that's definitely the way my great granda would have eaten. I mean, it's usually only old men I see like crack open the can of sardines in public and guzzle down. But hey, they knew what they were doing, so I'm not going to judge.
It's ancient wisdom, my friend.
Come on. Okay, number 4, make sleep a priority.
Yeah, one of the things I've noticed with a lot of young people that I work with and interact with is that they have adopted a framing about sleep, that sleep is optional, sleep is expendable, sleep is for the weak, sleep is for the lazy. No one has time to get more than X hours of sleep, and X usually gets solved at about a value of 5 or 6 hours a night. And what they don't realize is that sleep is something that our brains crave desperately. Why? Well, all kinds of reasons, but first and foremost, to reset every one of our brain cells, to clear out all the waste products that have accumulated, to replenish with nutrients. And all of that happens while we're asleep. And typically we need 7 to 9 hours a night. That's for adult brains. Adolescent and children's brains, they actually need even more than that. So principle number 1 for healthy sleep is just make your peace with the fact that you need to set aside that time, 7 to 9 hours every single night.
I listened to something recently and they were talking about should you hire a personal assistant? And one of the guys quipped back this like amazing pithy line, and he just said, and he was a very famous, productive, successful individual, and he just came out and said, if you're too busy that you need to hire a PA, you're just too busy, period. And I thought that was a really unique take on, in this highly optimized culture where we're trying to squeeze as much out of everything, that was a really nice, healthy little moment where it was like, there are ancient boundary lines built into the human existence that you just can't cross. And sleep is just one of them, And if you don't have enough time in your life for, let's say, 8 hours of sleep, for some people 9 hours, for some people maybe even 10, then you're just too busy. And, there's sacrifices that have to be made in order for you to get that. And again, to quote Granny, the infamous wisdom of Granny, you always have to pay your debt back when it comes to sleep. And I kind of believe that, like it's a little bit of like an old wives' tale, but you eventually, you pay it back eventually, whether it's through getting sick and having to take a week off work, or whether it's through something more serious down the line, or whether it's just through, you pay it back by feeling like super grouchy and unproductive through your workday. It's just not something that you can kind of skip. It can be optimized, which are some things we're talking about, but it can't be skipped. And a little thing that you kind of put me onto was the importance of waking up and going to bed at roughly the same time every day. My whole life I've been very good for the most part at getting up at the same time every day, but the going to bed at the same time every day was a little bit different. Or I would kind of do the typical, be disciplined Monday to Friday and then kind of just sleep binge over the weekend. Something that has really helped me is, have you ever seen those really cheap little like Casio watches that have become kind of like very hipster to use? Like they're having a bit of a moment among people, which I really I appreciate. But they have this really annoying / perfect feature built into them. And we're talking about like a 10 or 15 bucks watch, where once you set an alarm, you can have it to go off at the same time every single day. And that's what I use for my alarm clock. It's just easy, it's simple, it sits beside my bed, and I never have to turn my alarm on. It's just always on. The other thing I will say is that at one point in my life when I was way too hyperactive and putting in way too many hours in work, I also actually had an alarm to tell me to go to bed. So I didn't just have like a wake up alarm, I also had like a go to sleep alarm. And,
brilliant.
That was useful. It was a little scaffold that I had up in my life for a temporary season that has kind of helped me instill that consistent pattern. And what that's also helped me to do is maintain some of my other practices really, really well, because I'm not spending the first hour on screens, like we said. So I'm guaranteeing myself a 1 hour every single morning to invest in one of these practices. Screens as well, like the bright light from your screens, it's been proven it can really affect your sleep. I think most of us know that by now, but our fifth step is kind of the opposite of that, and that is, expose yourself to bright light first thing in the morning. So you want to avoid it before you go to sleep, but you actually kind of want to seek it out first thing in the morning. Steve, tell us why.
So, and this takes us back to the ancestral hunter-gatherer environment. Again, our ancestors for hundreds of thousands of years were on a lifelong camping trip. They lived outdoors. Their body was entrained to the rhythms of nature. And what that meant was they got to see the sun come up every single day. And what that does is it gives a beautiful reset of the body clock. It gives a beautiful reset of our internal rhythms that 16 hours later are going to cause us to have this huge increase in sleep drive through a hormone that many people know about called melatonin. Well, guess what? When we get bright light, and I mean brighter than typical indoor lighting, I mean step outside and it's automatically going to be dramatically brighter, even on a cloudy day, as long as the sun is up. That light is like a drug that hits specialized receptors in the retina in the back of the eye. It's got a broadband connection to your body clock circuitry, the center of the brain. It's going to regulate your clock. It's going to regulate your hormones. It's going to regulate your alertness and arousal and energy, mental clarity. Bright light is so critical to so many aspects of well-being. And it's one of the things that we've really sacrificed in living this modern 21st century indoor lifestyle, because indoor lighting is not bright enough to get the job done.
And again, there's some really awesome habit stacking opportunities of connecting your exercise routine with also getting outside and getting your bright light that way. There's also, you can buy something that I use every single morning because I live in a country where it doesn't get light until 9 o'clock really during the winter. I have, in the UK, we call them sad lamps, and I think you guys call them happy lamps, which is for a fun discussion another time about the differences between the different cultures. But it's basically a way to supplement light exposure. It's these really bright, roughly 10,000 lux lighting, which is a measurement of how bright a light is. And, I'll sit after I do my exercise, I do a little bit of journaling in the morning, and I sit beside my lamp. Sometimes I have it beside me whenever I'm having breakfast, and you're talking 15 to 30 minutes, and it does me rightly and makes me feel very, very good.
Yeah, so 15 minutes for most of us. 15 minutes is first thing in the morning, or within a half hour of awakening, either stepping outside if the sun is up or turning on a bright light box inside. Going to make an enormous difference.
Awesome. So the sixth one, I'm not going to go into in any detail at all, because we just did a huge deep dive on the importance of making social connection a priority. If you would like to really take the deep dive in that, I would point you to our third episode. If you haven't checked it out already, we talked a lot about why it's important, how it can be such a protective tool in keeping us safe from things like depression. I think Steve quoted this insane study by Brown and somebody. Who was it? Brown? They're famous.
Brown and Harris. Yeah.
Brown and Harris. And they showed that if someone has a close friend, they're something like 3 times less likely. Was it to get depression or to recover from depression?
To become clinically depressed when they encounter a severe, painful life event.
Crazy.
And and the close friend could be a spouse, it could be a partner, it could be, a family member, just some intimate emotional confidant, somebody who can be there for emotional support when the fecal matter hits the rotating oscillating
What a
rotary
great
device.
callback, Steve. You're on fire. I think our biggest takeaway, or my biggest takeaway from that episode, was like the importance of creating consistent rhythms and appointments with the people you care about most.
Yeah, and the only thing to say about that, in addition, is just that we really did focus on, well, how do we do this in the age of social distance, in the age of the pandemic era? And so we really want to encourage you, if you've been struggling with this, especially during the pandemic, which is still ongoing right now as we record this, I think we had a lot of really helpful thoughts about how to make that happen, no matter what circumstances you find yourself in.
You're on a roll, Steve. Number 7, avoid rumination. Go for it.
Yeah, rumination. We talked about this in episode 2 just a bit. These are basically, rumination is a fancy clinical word for dwelling and brooding and just perseverating over and over and over again on negative thoughts. Basically, woulda, coulda, shoulda thoughts about something painful that happened in the past. Those are usually, by the way, depressive thoughts, or brooding over, this horrible threat in the future that I'm afraid might happen. Those are usually anxiety related thoughts. Rumination is like a mental doom loop that just keeps us. Yeah. It amplifies the intensity of our negative emotions. It amplifies the activity of our stress circuitry, which is usually in overdrive anyway, if we're suffering from a form of mental health difficulty. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to learn how to be mindful, to notice when we are caught in that perseverative, over and over and over sort of ruminating, dwelling, and then learn how to redirect our attention elsewhere. And one of the best ways that we can do this, it turns out, is by changing the scenery, because most of us have, it sounds kind of ridiculous to say it, Hugh, but I think a lot of us have like our favorite little ruminating spots where, for me, one of the places is behind the wheel of my automobile. Another is in my kitchen when I'm doing the dishes. And so sometimes it's possible just to stay in the same spot and redirect. But sometimes if we need the big guns on this, sorry, that's a very American way of putting it. We need the big guns, ladies and gentlemen. We can change the scenery and we can get out into nature, because nature has really the optimal blend of stimulation to capture our attention, to soothe us, and to get us thinking generally in a much healthier manner.
Ding, ding, ding. Ladies and gentlemen, that leads us very smoothly into point number 8, which is, you've guessed it, get out into nature. And yeah, there's a lot of things I want to say here. I think there's like something in the back of my head that, like, wasn't there studies done about like the color green and like how it changes your brain, and why like in cities that didn't have a lot of green in it, they found that their overall well-being was like less. There's a lot of crazy stuff that you could get into whenever it comes to nature.
Oh, dude, I think I'm sorry. I'm interrupting you while you're on a roll, but can I just say one thing?
Oh, this is what podcasts are for, please.
Okay. Yeah. And we might have maybe touched on this briefly before, but when we're out in nature, there is a type of healthy bacteria that we inhale that gets into our bloodstream through our lungs. And we only encounter this basically when we're in a setting with lots of natural soil.
Crazy.
And that little sucker, it's called, if you want to look it up, Mycobacterium vaccae. Maybe we'll have it in the show notes.
We should make a t-shirt with Mycobacterium vaccae on it and make him a running character.
I will leave it to you to do the fine illustration on that. M. vaccae, as we in the business say, M for short for Mycobacterium. M. vaccae gets into the brain and it actually helps with our energy and attention. It's really cool. So, there's so many different ways in which nature is healing and soothing and restorative. It helps our attention. It helps our stress response. It helps energize. We're big fans.
I've just redrafted the title of this practice to Get Outside and Take a Walk with M. Bacay.
I love it.
The one I said for number 9 was build in times of reflection to review what's working and what's not. And I'll kind of come at this from a few different levels. So I do have a daily practice of reflection. I kind of mentioned it earlier. Whenever I'm sitting beside my little sad lamp, I'll sit down and I'll have a time of journaling. The book's open. I'm looking through my day. I'm kind of reviewing what's in the calendar, what's coming up, how I'm feeling about it, ways I want to approach it. And now this is something that I actually picked up during the pandemic because I was really seeking a way to signify the end of my day when I was working from home. I have just that little evening routine where I do a little stretch, and then I have a little small book right beside my bed, and it's literally like 3 lines. I think the first one is like, what do I want to keep about today? So what's something I did today that I'm like, oh, that was actually really smart, or that was really useful, and I actually want to remember that for, the days going forward. And it can be something as like ridiculously simple, like, oh, like whenever I'm done working out, if I go upstairs and boil the kettle before I go in and brush my teeth, then it's ready for me whenever I come out, and it means I don't have to stand there for 5 minutes or whatever it is. That's a really simple example. There's way more kind of personal ones where it's like, oh, I didn't like the way that I disciplined my daughter there. I didn't like how I responded to something that my wife said in this scenario. Then, so things you want to keep, things you want to change. I just find doing that on a daily basis are really helpful to pick some of those really nitty gritty small little things that over the course of your life can build up into something big. I then like to do like a weekly thing where I kind of reflect on, okay, like how's the last week gone? Again, what do I want to keep? What do I want to change? I look at my schedule. I review that. I do the same thing quarterly, and I do the same thing yearly. The general principle here is, I think if you don't have time set apart to see how things are working for you, it can be very hard to actually identify the things that are moving the needle in your own life. But also it can be very hard to then kind of like move forward with some of the things that you really want to improve and you really want to kind of amp up.
Yeah, I love that. And it might sound a little bit counterintuitive for people, but oftentimes if we are spending a lot of time trapped in our negative thoughts, if we're ruminating and brooding, writing things down, it might sound like a trigger. It might sound like, oh, God, if I start getting into this and reviewing and reflecting, I'm just going to be off to the races with these negative thoughts. But it turns out that most of the time we find clinically, we find in the research that when we write things down, even if they're hard things, it gives us a much cleaner, a more objective sort of vantage point from which we can then step away and say, okay, I did a brain dump. It's down on paper. I've had some time to reflect, and now I can just leave it there on the page. I don't have to carry it around with me. So this is really, really therapeutic in lots of different ways.
I love that, man. This sounds really cheesy and hallmarky, and it is. It's probably something you would kind of see like on a bumper sticker or something, but we really like to do like a little thing before we go to sleep where we just share like our three favorite parts of the day. And it sounds really, really cliche, but I'm going to back it up slightly. I was listening to a podcast with Angela Duckworth. No, is it Duckworth? Yeah. She's a great lady. So she talks all about resilience. And I remember where I was cutting the grass and I was listening to this episode, and she talks about, really what you point your mind towards is what your brain will kind of really absorb. And she talks about how there's so much stimuli going on all around us. There's so much happening throughout our days and in our memories. And we're thinking about the past, we're thinking about the future, that all that we really observe is like this tiny, tiny little slice of light. Like imagine being in like a dark shed or something, and there's a little crack in the wood and the sunlight's coming through. She's like, that's what your conscious mind is observing, and everything else is subconscious. And she's kind of like, it would be wise for us to try and direct that little slither of consciousness towards things that are positive and things that are good. And so this really helped me, particularly whenever I'm going through my depressive episodes, to keep this practice up. Kind of, again, call them 3 slices of light, like a bit cheesy, but to look back and see even the days that I am depressed, there's actually these amazing things that are happening. And it could be something simple like, watching the ducks for 5 minutes with my daughter, or, a great meal or a great conversation or whatever. Because I'm so quick in the past to, the days and weeks that I was depressed, just to kind of almost like take like a black marker and just scribble all over the calendar and be like, well, this was wasted time. And this small little practice has just helped me kind of try to see that actually during those times, it's not wasted time. They're difficult times, but there's still amazing things that can happen in the middle of them.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it really ties into another whole line of, I think, really helpful clinical work on the practice of gratitude and cultivating gratitude. And so there's a simple little practice that really just, I think, dovetails nicely into what he was just saying. When you're reflecting back on your day, to reflect back on 3 things for which you are grateful from the day, 3 things that, and they, very often I think they're most helpful if they're the little things. So cultivating gratitude is an extraordinary antidote often to the doom loop of toxic negative rumination. So wonderful
awesome
habit to cultivate.
Awesome. Our 10th and final one is kind of a habit that can really make the last one easier and possible. So this idea of scheduling, I've referred to them as Sabbaths and vacations. And just this idea of like having time in our week and having time in our year, I would say preferably, 2 or 3 times a year, especially, just have these times just to disconnect, time away from work, time away from the usual kind of humdrum of daily life. If you have a weekly Sabbath practice, this one day out of the week that you make the commitment to perhaps not check your email or, not spend the whole day on WhatsApp or maybe not even be on your screen at all. So you can spend that time with your family or spend that time out in nature or spend that time doing whatever it is that you enjoy doing. It makes you feel restored and gives you some of that R&R that we all need to kind of keep going. But, these times of disconnect, I've just found help me to reconnect with the things that matter most to me, whether it is kind of the overall values or the goals that I kind of have for my life, or obviously the low-hanging fruit there is the relationships and the people that I care about the most. So, I'm a big believer that if it's not scheduled, it doesn't get done. And just like I shared in the last episode, it's just super important for me to set up reoccurring moments of disconnect, and that's been a practice I've been doing for the last 3 years, and it's just made such a big difference.
Yeah, I love it. And it really, if we think about it, it kind of builds back on the principle of healthy sleep, right? Where sleep is this thing that we need to schedule. We need to set aside the time for it. Why? Because we need that time to recharge, to recover, to be restored at night. And well, the same principle applies during our waking life, not every day, maybe necessarily, at least not at that sort of intense level. But just like you said, every so often, and maybe that, for us, it might be once a week. It might be in a more protracted sense, once a month. We need the time to unplug completely, to tell our employer we're not available, to send out the notification. Do you ever do this, by the way? I know you do, Hugh, but, do you ever have the email notification that goes out and says, hey, I'm out of the office. Bro, I'm not available.
It's my favorite thing to write. And I give you one better. I just discovered this last year that you can also do it on WhatsApp. So if anyone's a big WhatsApp user, if you download the business version of WhatsApp, it's free and it's totally the same thing, but you get access to all these different tools. And one of them is an autoresponder. So whenever the 2-week holiday there over Christmas, I set it up, and then I had a 3-day, we can get into this another time, I had a 3-day silent retreat. And, it was just so...
I told you were like a monk.
Oh no, he's revealed the card. And it just takes that little monkey part of my brain and puts it to sleep whenever it realizes that like all of the messages are kind of taken care of with that autoresponder. And it's also a great level of accountability as well, because if I've sent someone a message that says, I'll get back to you on Monday, and then I get back to them on like a Thursday or a Friday, I'm kind of just like, oh, well, this guy can't keep boundaries. Do you know what I mean? So that's been really helpful. Like even the last time I did it there over Christmas, like I did find that moment where like I really wanted to like, open WhatsApp and kind of respond to somebody. And then it's just kind of like, no, like you've said that you won't, and they know that you've said that. So, it's an easy way to kind of be held accountable. That said, the little bonus one, just to circle back to what we said kind of at the top of the show, was just like the importance of being kind to yourself, the importance of going slow. It's not about creating this ridiculously high standard to create this tightrope for yourself that you will fall off and feel bad about or filled with shame or whatever it is. These are practices that you can build upon and improve over time. And that's why I love the idea of daily kind of checking in with yourself, because there's things, even kind of like quote unquote rules that I have in my life that I kind of go back on all the time. And the daily moment of reflection helps me to be like, I like to kind of speak to myself kind of gently, where I'm like, okay, kid, like, did you realize that didn't work out the way that you had planned, or it didn't work out the way you maybe had intended it to? That's totally fine. It's happened. It's time to move forward. But what can you do maybe next time to put yourself in a better place? And I think that's all what it's about. These are kind of points of reference that you can see. And I think this is an underrated and underspoken about thing. There are like little practices that if you start to see slip in your own life can also act as like a little bit of like an alarm bell. Like, oh, like maybe something is out of order here. Maybe there's something going on with my mental health or with my well-being, or maybe I'm getting too busy here. And I know for my experience with depression, very often I would only become aware that I was actually going into the depressive episode almost like when it was too late, aka whenever I'm like right bang in the middle of it. And I just find that these practices have been a really nice way to give me like a point of indication to say, oh, look, very interesting. And, you're looking at yourself with curiosity. It's like, interesting. This is the second week that you didn't work out. I wonder if there's anything going on there. And also for the people close to me, my friends and my family especially, they can see whenever I'm slipping in some of those practices, and they can step in. And the question they ask me is, are you doing all right? It's not, hey, you didn't do your thing. Yep. It's, hey, is everything okay? And that has been such a wonderful safety net to kind of walk around with in my day-to-day.
Yeah, so I was just thinking, just to bring it around full circle, lifestyle medicine, right? If we are living our best possible life, our healthiest possible life, with the whole set of practices that we know are going to enhance our physical health and protect us from illness, it doesn't mean that we're never going to need to see a doctor, right? It doesn't mean that we're never going to become ill, especially if some novel pathogen hacks its way into our bodies, right? But what it means is that we are going, on average, to be dramatically healthier than if we just completely ignored our diet and our activity and our stress management and our sleep and all the other things that are of importance. So I just want to put it out there that nobody gets surprised if someone becomes physically ill and needs to see a doctor, even if we know they are a health freak, a health nut. Occasionally their body is going to need some help returning to full health, right? That's why we have medical professionals. It's why we have evidence-based surgeries and evidence-based drugs that can be absolutely life-saving, life-changing. Same principles apply with our mental health. We can do everything right. We can put the scaffolding in place, all this protective, enormously helpful set of practices. And yet, there will still be times for many of us when we are temporarily overwhelmed and off our game. And there's absolutely no shame and no blame if we get to that point where it's like, I still need some professional help. By the way, if you're listening to this and you're in a place of deep suffering right now, you may be saying to yourself, these are things that I can't do right now in my current place of impairment and shutting down and suffering. And so you might need someone to come and step along beside you, someone who's a trained, compassionate professional who can take you by the hand, metaphorically, and gently guide you into some of these practices that can help, but, can also provide skilled psychotherapy. In some cases, can provide helpful medication. And so I just want to make sure that nobody's listening to this thinking, oh, if I can just do all of these things, that's going to guarantee that I will never need to see my therapist. I'll never need to take, I can just take my bottle of medication and dump it in the toilet because I'm good to go, because I listen to Steve and Hugh and I'm doing all the things. For some people, it absolutely will be true. Hugh, it's one of the most amazing privileges of my career has been to be contacted out of the blue by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that have read my book or have seen my online videos on YouTube and have said, I just started doing the things that you've talked about, and it's been revolutionary. And it has allowed me to be at a place of much deeper health than I've ever been. And I didn't need to see a professional. And it's miraculous and wonderful when that happens. But what I would also say, and you've got to take this with a grain of salt because, hey, I'm a licensed psychologist, but many people are not going to be able to do it completely on their own. Mm-hmm. So I just want to put that out there, make sure nobody misunderstands what we're saying.
Totally. And it's a mixing of our metaphor that we used at the start, but like we all need some scaffolding at times,
Absolutely.
We need those people to climb up and give the window a little polish or help us fix the the leaky roof or whatever it is, and that's where the tribe comes in, both in terms of our friends and our family, but as you've said, also the professionals that are out there who have dedicated their lives to doing exactly that and helping us get back on our feet. And the scaffolding is,
Absolutely.
It's things that may need to go up and go down multiple times in our lives. We may need to have a period where the scaffolding is up for a very long time and it's slowly taken down. Or, let's be honest, for some of us, it's something that is up for the rest of our lives and we learn to live with it and we learn to see the beauty in it as well. And I guess I'd love to end this episode. I'm going to steal this completely. I'm on a bit of a Gabor Mate kick at the minute because I said in the last episode, I'm reading a book by him. But, what we opened the episode with and what we've kind of been saying throughout that, there's also some coping mechanisms that we may have picked up during this season that are unhealthy. There are things that we probably don't want to be taking forward with us on the onward journey. Some of us will have a lengthier process of undoing some of them. And that's where, some of the conversations we'll have around addiction will come in really helpful. But for others, it's just a matter of, okay, I'm going to drop this thing now. We're coming out of a pandemic. That's fine. I'm going to stop doing X, Y, and Z. But Gabor's got this great thing. And, I do think it's so important. You probably hear it in my voice sometimes. I come from a culture of tough love. And it's been very healing for me to embrace a lot of this kind of kindness towards yourself kind of stuff that is floating around online. And he has this great thing where he says, picture in your head whatever the unhealthy coping mechanism is, and just with genuine kindness say thank you. Like, thank you for your service because you did help me get through a very difficult season. Like, dear online chess, you helped me put away a few really difficult moments during lockdown. But you know what? I appreciate you. I appreciate what you've done for me, but we're going to part ways now. You're no longer helpful in my day-to-day life. You no longer help me connect with my daughter or connect with my friends. And actually, I'm going to leave you behind on the onward journey. And I find that to be a very helpful way of looking at things rather than the kind of white knuckle, brass tacks, hard as nails way to do things sometimes.
That's beautiful.
It's
beautiful.
It's really nice I think to leave this idea with us that, we need compassion on ourselves for the last 2 years. We may need to make some changes, but there's also places where we can actually be really proud of ourselves and say, look, I have grown so much in this area, or this was the pandemic finally gave me the opportunity to really get my diet under control or whatever it is. And if you're not there, if the pandemic has been a complete overall negative experience for you, as Steve said, the great thing about pandemics is they always end, and we have the opportunity now to focus on what's inside our control, and some of those things are the practices that we talked about today.
Yeah, so beautifully put. It reminds me of one of my heroes in the field. Some of our listeners will know the name Marsha Linehan, who's one of our great psychotherapy innovators. And one of the lines that I heard her say for the first time about 20 years ago that's really stuck with me is like, look, no matter what you are doing, you can always look for the valid in it, that there's something in it that has served you, even if you want to judge it, even if you want to say, this is horrible, I need to drop this right away. This compassionate approach that Hugh is talking about is really about taking a step back and looking at it through the eyes of compassion and saying, there's something that was valid there. This served me in some way. And yet there's also simultaneously often a need to recognize the ways in which it's not helping, in which now it's time to let go. And so we can be simultaneously affirming, yep, there was a reason why I did these things. And yep, I also need to make a change so that I can live my best possible life. And that's really what it's all about for us.
I remember doing an interview with somebody, and they spent the whole time talking about the difference between the coach versus the judge mentality in terms of the self-talk that we give ourselves inside our heads. And I always find that to be a helpful framework as well, is, if you catch the judge inside of you going to town, how can you just slowly, gently kind of shift that voice into a coach? And, the coach doesn't deny that there are things that need to change, but they approach it in just a real kind of gentle and encouraging way, where it's a kind of like, the High School Musical thing we talked about last time, like we're all in this together, and it's like you're on the same team. You're not fighting against yourself, you're working with yourself. And I'm just really excited to, even just for myself, like walk through this next season of life with some of these things that I've been able to pick up during the pandemic, and also now newfound knowledge of things that I know I need to lay down. Both are very helpful, and both are the foundation to good mental health, which, as you say, is what it's all about.
Absolutely. Yeah, this has been really fun. It's been I never thought I would say that 2 years into a pandemic, that really just reviewing ways in which, even in the midst of this challenge and stress and a great deal of suffering, that it can also be a catalyst for renewal and growth and learning and taking inventory in a way that can leave us better prepared to drop some of the emergency scaffolding that we've put up and go forward in a way that's even better than it was when we entered into this difficult time.
Awesome. Steve, you're the king of landing the plane. Thank you so much. I was like, what do you call that American hero, Sully? It was like watching Sully steer the plane into the Hudson there. That was epic.
Oh, you're too kind. Well, look, dude, I'm finally freaking awake now. I want to go back and do a retake on our first 10, 15 minutes, but I know you're not going to let me do that, so that's fine.
Oh,
I'll let you work your editing magic.
It's, you know what? It's the beautiful give and take of the transatlantic collaboration. As Steve is waking up, I'm pretty much going to sleep, so it's a funny kind of passing of the baton, and we have to find ways to meet in the middle there. But yeah, look, I just want to jump in and say, like, thank you so much for listening to this episode, but especially if you've been tracking with us throughout the whole series. It has been an absolute blast, and personally so insightful just to go through some of this stuff and share it with you. Steve, I have to thank you as well for your time, because it's just been so awesome to hang out and launch this podcast. I know we kind of said, look, let's do a series and see what happens, and here we are. Like, we've already probably promised like 20 more episodes, because like, yeah, we're going to do a deep dive on this. Yeah, we're going to do a deep dive on this. It's like, oh yeah, we'll definitely do a deep dive on this one too. Like, don't forget about that. So, if there was any illusion in anyone's head, we're absolutely going to keep this podcast going beyond this series. And what I will say is if this series has impacted you in any way at all, number one, we would love to hear from you. Our website is mentalhealth.fm. You can send us a message. You can also send us a voice question for anything that we've covered so far, or something that we haven't covered that you'd love to hear from us. We'd love to do like a Q&A episode down the line. Second thing I'll say is, if you've really enjoyed this series, we would really appreciate you sharing this with your friends and your family and the people that you're in community with. I will make like a little mini-series webpage on our website that will hold all these episodes together, nice and easy, with links out to all the major podcast platforms as well. And I guess today, Steve, do you want to announce the next series, what we're doing?
Sure. So, I, as a college professor in teaching in the U.S., we often have these sweeping introductory courses. So we've got Psych 101, Intro to Psychology. We've got Soc 101, Intro to Sociology. We've got Bio 101. We've got a bunch of 101s, which is like, hey, let's take a sweeping overview of this topic. So Hugh and I thought it'd be kind of fun and hopefully really useful and informative to have a 101 series on 4 major areas in which people find their mental health really challenged. So what you can be looking forward to in the weeks ahead are episodes titled ADHD 101. Addiction 101, Depression 101, Anxiety 101. It's going to be a whirlwind tour and hopefully really, really interesting and informative, but even maybe more importantly, really helpful and useful for you, for the people that you know that might be having struggles in it. So even if it's something that you're not struggling with, I'll bet if you think about it right now, there's somebody in your life that's struggling with each of those 4 major classes of mental illness.
That's so awesome, man. I actually cannot wait. And I think like you said, I'm actually really excited to do the ADHD one because we haven't covered or touched on that at all yet. So that could be a really interesting place to start off next. But who knows? You'll have to subscribe to see whatever we drop next. The other thing that we'd like to give a quick plug to is that we are becoming a highly official professional podcast in that we are launching our Patreon. So if you would like to support us, you'd like to join us on this journey of sharing content like this to help people in their journeys with mental health, you can support us on Patreon. There'll be a link to that in the description of this episode and on our website. Anything else you want to say on that?
Yeah, I just want to let folks know that doing this podcast, I hope you can tell we both really love it. We're both really, really enjoying it, but it's a labor of love right now. And, for Hugh, who is raising a young family, who's a 20-something guy who's wise way beyond his years, but he's sacrificing his time and really income that he could be earning doing other things. And so my dream for this podcast is that we would have people who love it and support it and are willing to basically help us pay for Hugh's time producing the show. For myself, I mean, yeah, I've got a day job at the university, but I do a lot of consulting. I do a lot of speaking. I've worked for NBA teams. I've done all kinds of training, and I want to make this my major focus. But that would mean letting go of, other opportunities. And so if we had a community of people that want to partner with us to say, yeah, I want to help you get the word out and not feel like you're having to make an enormous sacrifice of your time and of your earning, that would mean the world to us. So that's our hope for the new year.
I guess to wrap it up and put a bow on it at this stage with our first series, again, just want to say thanks to you and express just how much I've enjoyed doing this series with you, and I really look forward to catching you again next time.
Oh yeah, listen, man, this has been an honor. It's been a privilege. It's been a pleasure, and I'm so excited to see what the new year has in store for this joint venture, because it feels like there's something happening here that's going to be really useful for a lot of folks. So that's all for today.
Let's go. And that's it. That's where I'll end.
Let's go. Okay. Love it.